Uniondale is going to benefit from the work we're doing. Absolutely. We couldn't agree more.
Go ahead, the minority leader.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. And I want to discuss, and I don't know if, Josh, if you need to come back up in addition to Ashley and Jim staying there, but I do want to ask you a little bit about the EB-5 program. And obviously it's received a lot of attention over the last couple of weeks. It's very new to many of us. And if I understand you correctly, the EB-5 program is a program that allows investors to invest up to $500,000, which creates jobs. And while at the same time, the investors get an exchange in visas for their families. So that being said, you had mentioned that EB-5 was used in the Barclays project.
In the Atlantic Yards project.
Atlantic Yards
Correct.
project. And who was the financial center there?
We've worked with two different ones, and the one we are proposing to work with here, it's called a regional center, for those who are getting used to the terminology here, is the USIS, the U.S. Immigration Fund, and that's who we're going to be working with in Nassau, and that's who we worked with twice in Brooklyn.
Okay. Who were the other ones that you worked with in Brooklyn?
I don't know.
I think it was called New York City Regional Center.
Yeah.
And basically, one of the things that happened with these types of loans is the first regional center that we used, they're just sort of not making loans anymore. They've made some money and they've kind of retired. And since then, they've become more common and the interest rates have gone up. So anyway.
I see. Would the name Nicholas Mastroianni sound familiar?
Yes, he's the gentleman that runs the regional center that we'll be working with.
He is.
Yes, and we're well aware of the news articles about some of his background.
Well,
if you want to ask us about
sure.
it, we're happy to talk
well,
about it.
I'm going to get to that, Ms. Khan. Let me ask you about Mr. Mastroianni. There was a story in October of 2014 in Fortune magazine. Some would say that's or Fortune.com. Some would say that's a pretty credible resource. But it talked about the fact in that story, which I found a little puzzling. It talked about in that fact, and I'll read a paragraph from the Fortune.com story. It would be hard to find a figure who has risen faster in this burgeoning realm than Nicholas Mastroianni II. In just 4 years, he has developed a lucrative role raising money for marquee projects such as Atlantic Yards, the giant Brooklyn development anchored by the Barclays Center and home of the NBA Nets. Forest City Ratner, which is developing Atlantic Yards, has also retained Mr. Mastroianni to raise EB-5 money for his renovation, this is the kicker, of the Nassau Coliseum. Now, how could it be possible this legislature received notification of this proposal in March? How can this be contemplated unless this story is inaccurate by Fortune.com? How can this story reflect that this has been a concept that's been talked about since October 14th of 2014?
I mean, October 14 was not very long ago, I don't think. And the financing takes some time to get underway and to prepare and to launch. And we have been underway assuming that this was going to be sort of an easy approval. We actually didn't even think that would require legislative approval. So it turns out that it did as we looked further into it. But again, we thought it was a simple sort of change in financing mechanism and was not going to be a very big deal.
So we are here today, and obviously it does
Correct.
require some legislative approval as has been provided by Josh and those in the county. So we are here today, but it just seems to me a little puzzling that here we are today when this probably should have been discussed with this legislative body back to October. But let's put that aside for a second. Let's talk a little bit about Mr. Mastroianni, if you don't mind. Mr. Mastroianni, and I'm reading from the Fortune.com story, has a long history of legal problems, failed ventures, and unpaid debts, which have continued to even as his professional fortunes have turned sharply upward, leaving a legacy of conflicts, judgments, and entanglements. Again, this is because the main lure that most of the immigrant investors, most of them, 80% of them Chinese, is getting a green card, which is why many are willing to accept little or no return on their $500,000 investment. So many people are doing this for the visas. Mr. Mastroianni continued to have personal troubles between 1985 and 1993, where court records show Rhode Island police arrested Mr. Mastroianni, the person that you're going to use as part of your regional financing, 4 times for a felony possession of a controlled substance. In 1989, the company he founded, Interstate Design and Construction, homeowners and subcontractors complained that Interstate did poor work, did not complete jobs, according to newspaper reports dating back to 1996. Again, I'm quoting this from Fortune.com. In May of 2000, records show that Mr. Mastroianni's business went into receivership. Banks foreclosed on his office properties and 2 homes. In 2002, a surety bond sued Mr. Mastroianni to recover costs for completing 28 of his soundproofing jobs and won $1.1 million in default judgment. That wasn't the end of his troubles. In July of 2013, the list goes on and on, he was sued by the Department of Labor, accusing him of diverting $401 and $361 required to pay employee pension fund contributions, which were made to less than quarterly. The suit claimed that Mr. Mastroianni illegally used the money for various personal expenses. He ended up paying the federal government back in April of 2006, $75,000. Again, as I said before, the financial woes personally. Then to top it off, in Florida, where he has a regional center, I believe. Even as legal disputes dragged on in Rhode Island courtrooms, Mr. Mastroianni relocated to Palm Beach County, Florida, where he began to operate a new company, Allied Capital and Development. Allied specializes in projects with the highest standards of quality and construction standards according to his promotional materials. Allied's website says Mr. Mastroianni has been recognized for his commitment and excellence in construction, and notes that he has hosted numerous charitable events and both prominent sports figures and political constituents. Yet, I'm going to read as long as it takes. Yep, it's on Fortune.com. I'm sorry, Mr. Becker, but you should have done your due diligence like I did.
Hold on. Hold on.
Yet,
I want you to
if I
finish,
may.
and then I'm going to comment.
Okay, if I may.
Okay?
If I appreciate that, Mr. Becker, but I did not interrupt you when you spoke, did I? Thank you very much. Yet, in Florida, virtually every one of the dozen or so projects Allied has launched over the past decade have faced delays, lawsuits, and construction problems. Allied has completed few of them. In July of 2004, a building collapsed. Allied's townhouse development in Hope Sound, named Tranquility, killed 2 workers and seriously injured several others. Now, I understand that Allied is not the construction manager, but I would be hard-found and hard-pressed to think, why would this legislative body consider going into business with somebody that has a scrupulous past like this? If you do not support the community benefits agreement, which is totally okay, you don't support the efforts of what they're trying to do, I totally get that. But at the same time, how could you support a measure that's going to go into, by the comments that Mrs. Cotton has made, that they plan to use Mr. Mastroianni again? How can we go into an agreement knowing somebody that allowed workers to be killed on his site because of not putting in the right protections, allowed outstanding lawsuits and legal suits? I mean, he had organized labor. Yeah, he did. If you allow me to read the whole thing, I'd be happy to read it to you. The bottom line is he has a history of multiple lawsuits by the U.S. federal government, the Department of Labor. He has a checkered past, and we are going to use him now for this mechanism for financing. It just seems to me that that would be the wrong approach, and to be honest, it's not one this measure should take, this legislation should take.
Josh,
We're happy to respond if you'd
Josh,
like.
would you like to
And
comment?
We're happy to respond.
He has just to clarify, he has a checkered past according to Fortune.com,
okay.
as well as the New York, the Daily News investor as well.
Mr. Abrams, I'm not an attorney, but our contract with Ratner is not a contract with Mr. Mastriano.
But Mr.
Right? That's the way it is.
But Madam Presiding Officer, you are forgetting that we are supporting a mechanism of EB-5 financing, which opens up this lease so that Mr. Mastroianni could come on in. He's a part of this process now.
Josh, would you comment, please?
He's a part of this process.
So there are a few comments to be made on that. One is that The federal government has approved the regional center with this individual, and until the county or Forest City knows otherwise, he is an approved entity to be a regional center. I would say that he's a lender. Effectively, they'd be creating a special purpose entity, and he'd be a lender. Most of the things that the legislator indicated is that on the construction side or other things, he apparently has a colorful past, I guess, but he's a lender in this instance. So it's not something that I would say would have an impact here. Also, what we are approving, or what the legislature would be approving, is for Forest City Ratner to utilize an EB-5 investor. If it's not this one, it would be another one. And if the EB-5 financing was not successful, Forest City Ratner is still required to obtain the institutional investor as it's set forth in the lease right now.
If I may finish, Madam Presiding Officer?
I'd like to turn it over to the public, if you don't mind.
I would, but I think if the public would indulge me because I do have.
I'll give you another 2 minutes. Go.
Thank you so much. I did want to get into really quickly, Josh, about Mr. Mastroianni. He does have an EB-5 which is based in Florida, correct? Harborside. Florida. He has a Florida Regional Center. I'm just reading it out of Fortune.com.
So if you're reading it out of there, then we'll agree with you. We're not reading it. So.
Okay. The reason why I mentioned that is because he's not as a contractor or as a construction manager. From what I can gather here, he's been sued as a regional center. Are you aware of that?
We are well aware of this article. We were obviously contacted by the reporter as it relates to this article. I do not have it memorized, so I'm not sure if I'm able to speak in detail to all the things. We certainly are aware of, I'll just use Josh's term, checkered past in this case. However, the USIF, Nick Mastroianni's regional center, is approved by the federal government, is on a list to be used. We have worked with him successfully in this sort of work, as have other developers that we're aware of.
No, I don't doubt the fact that he's approved to be used for this line of work. I just question that this 19 legislative body, knowing this information of this practice of unpaid legal fees and judgments against him and lawsuits, and obviously as his practice as a Florida regional center as well, I mean, it just seems to me to be unconscionable that you would present this entity to us at this time.
So the USIF has been approved
I'm sorry,
by,
not to cut you off, Ms. Collins, to finish my statement, without disclosing it.
without disclosing. We've disclosed.
You haven't disclosed any of this to this legislative body.
Yeah, no, you're right.
As far as I'm concerned,
we have an approved regional center who has worked also successfully with the state of New York, ESDC, who governs our project in Brooklyn. And in that case, they are an approved regional center working with
Mrs.
us.
Khan,
and it's approved by the U.S. government.
Okay.
And we absolutely stand by working with them.
Mrs. Khan,
certainly, we understand that there is a checkered past that you point to. We've read the article. We were contacted by the reporter. We're well aware. All this stuff is on the internet. It's certainly not a secret. And we've done 2 successful raises in Brooklyn with him already, and look forward to what I hope is what you guys most want to see, which is we're going to get the financing to do this project so we can deliver on the benefits and deliver on the project that you've asked us to do.
And Ms. Cotton, everything that I have read, which I'm sure you have read too, in the Fortune.com story, you don't have a problem with.
It's not for my business.
As far as city has a problem
what we're relating to today, as our work with USIF, which we believe to be in really good position, and the work we have done with him, there are no problems. And so that's what's relevant to us today. That's what's relevant to this body. That
No,
USIF,
let me correct you. What's relevant to this body is understanding what happened and why this information wasn't disclosed to this body. That's what's relevant to this body. We want to know why this information wasn't disclosed. I mean, when we had brought up the question in regards to the regional center, it should have been disclosed to us that we were going to use Mr. Mastroianni. If it wasn't, then we could have done our own research. It took me going up on the internet and doing a little homework on how Barclays was financed, and Brooklyn Atlantic Yards, and then basically coming up on these names, or coming up on this name, which I got to tell you, this is a 12-page printed out story, which is awful. And I know there's going to be people that are going to turn a blind eye and vote for it anyway. But I could tell you right now, I couldn't sleep at night knowing I voted for someone that has done these types of things and is being sued in court like this. And if Forest City is prepared to go into bed or to drag this legislature and this county into bed with these folks, then shame on them. But the bottom line is it won't be a vote from the 1st Legislative District. Thank you.
Deputy Presiding Officer Nicolello.
Yeah, Mr. Meyer, tell me again what role Mr. Mastroianni is going to play in the process, or can you explain it to me again?
Right, you guys want to go through the role?
As you said, he's a lender.
Right, so he's a lender on this, effectively.
So money is going to flow from Mr. Mastroianni, his clients, or however it works with this this arrangement, and then Barclays, NAT receives the money and then spends it on a project.
Right, there'll actually be a drawdown schedule on that. They wouldn't receive it all at once. They would draw down as they move forward with the project.
Okay.
And as Ms. Cotton indicated, they've had 2 prior successful capital raises with him.
But from the perspective of the county, is there any risk to the county at all? I mean, since the money is actually going to the developer as opposed to the developer lending money to somebody else and being out and therefore losing, not having the assets to complete the project. Is there any risk here to the county because of the history that Legislator Abrams has just brought up?
Right. The money comes into a special purpose entity. It's raised. That this individual would go out and raise the capital, would go into a 100% financed special purpose entity, and ultimately it would be no different than if you're going to the bank, and it would be a drawdown schedule for the bank from the bank. And if there was anything that went wrong as a result of that, you'd be in no different position than you would be if you had an institutional investor.
Okay. All right. So we would be in no different position if something went wrong with this.
Correct.
Okay.
I'm going to. I'm sorry.
I just have one more question that's different in regards to the EV financing. There was a question in the story, either Mrs. Cotton or Mr. Lester could answer this one. There was a reference in the story which, I'm sorry, it wasn't in the story. It was probably there was another story, actually, not the Fortune.com. But there was a reference that when you guys did the Atlantic Yards project through EB5 financing, how much of a stakehold did the Chinese foreign investors have in the Atlantic Yards project? Or how much do they currently have?
There have been 3 raises. You're talking about through EB5?
Through EB5.
There have been 3 raises. So the first raise was about $228 million, and subsequent raises have been around $250 million.